class, it's Professor Brown. I'm just wanting to do our weekly chat, and I wanted to kind of go over our readings. You've had quite a bit of them over the last week and a half. And so let's start out with your Klein-Pell text and some key things that I really took out of it, and I hope I want to kind of focus on with you as well. We're going to go back to that outcome. I mean, I know we've kept on that theme all the way through these last few weeks, but again, breaking it down into what is outcomes and how are they evaluated. So you've heard that term, we've moved to this value and outcome-based healthcare system. Well, what we need to understand is that outcomes demonstrate the effectiveness of the care that we are giving. And so we even break that down into another subchapter of outcome, and that's your metrics. You've heard that. You have metrics that you're supposed to be meeting. And then underneath that, the metrics use indicators, and the indicators are the broken down tests within those metrics. And those can be very different depending on what indicator or what metric you're trying to identify. And then your indicators kind of give an estimate of how your care has affected your patient. And again, this is all in your text as well. And then those indicators must be valid and reliable measures, and they show the progress towards the outcome. And generally, most agencies work underneath a set indicators that all agencies are using in order to identify the effectiveness of the care that they're giving. And then those are often reported to agencies outside your organization, and then those are called your performance metrics. So sometimes you'll hear that, like, what are our performance metrics? And those are embedded throughout our healthcare system. And they come into different categories. One is quality improvement, public reporting, regulation, and payment application are like the main ones. And this all came out of the Affordable Care Act again. And underneath the Affordable Care Act in 2010, it further then had a section called hospital value-based purchasing. And that really wanted to look at how to improve hospital performance. And that came out of CMS. And it looks at withholding hospital reimbursement until they get those performance indicators. And so each hospital gives those performance indicators on how well they're doing on infection rates, falls, all that kind of stuff. And then they benchmark it compared to other hospitals. And if you actually go to the CMS website, it can compare hospital to hospital and how they're doing in some of these outcomes or indicators. And then what was interesting too is for the longest time, they could not identify specifically what were nursing specific. And so that changed, and I'm going to find that. So on page 92 of the Klein-Pell text, it actually breaks it down into how they came up with nurse-sensitive outcomes that were more specific to nursing and how nurses influenced those. And so things such as use of restraints, hospital-acquired infections, catheter urinary tract infections, central catheter-associated bloodstream infections, ventilator-associated pneumonias, and additional measures including smoking cessation, education or counseling. So those all kind of came out of these specific nursing areas that they want to pull data as part of those indicators for reimbursement. And so then they broke them into nursing intervention classification, or NIC, or nursing outcome classification, NOC. And that came out of the University of Ohio, who developed those specific indicators. So when you're looking at your EHR, I'm sure some of you have seen, they have sections that are specific that say NIC or NOC, and you have to go and document whether or not you've done certain things. Again, it's not because your hospital is trying to be mean to you. It's because they're trying to get their reimbursement. They're trying to show that they're, assessing these outcome indicators, and that you, as nurses, are doing your best to make sure that you're meeting those. It's important if you understand that so much of these outcome indicators really are linked to reimbursement. I think especially as a CNL working on a unit, you could be educating the nurses that it's not just meaning to be extra paperwork for them. It's really looking at improving the financial health of your institution. And hopefully most hospitals can then, purchase better staffing ratios. And I know that's not happening at a lot of institutions, but hopefully based upon the reimbursement, if they get higher reimbursement based upon some of these outcomes, they can put it back and give you better staffing ratios and have more accessible funding. So when it comes to the nurse practitioner, your text talks about it on page 95, that it is important for APRNs to really be thinking about how they can evaluate their outcomes, and that there are additional core competencies oftentimes found within the APRN role that demonstrate expertise in critical thinking, identifying knowledge, and that oftentimes APRNs have to develop their own ways of looking at outcomes and how they can identify, how they're benefiting their entity or their facility when improving their outcomes. So that was one part of that text. Your Klinefelter text also then talked about in Chapter 5 your literature review and different databases that can aid in helping you do research. And it talks about, again, your question and the importance of your question and what you're looking at assessing. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It really highlights the importance of using CINAHL and how it can be beneficial in improving your research, and that an adequate literature review is important in identifying what information is out there and what information is lacking before you start your study, because you may already have information out there that has led to better practice and supports evidence-based practice, and so it could actually, you doing your literature review could help you implement that change just by looking at studies that have already been done. It can also identify areas that are lacking or where there's a gap in the literature, and that would maybe be an area that you would want to implement a research study or some project in order to look at better ways of practice. So then we go into your Moran text this week and Chapter 6, which was a excellent synopsis of a scholarly project. And I know it says DNP scholarly project, but truly it's a scholarly project. It's a great outline for any master's scholarly project or DNP. And it really, again, highlighted the importance of the literature review and the value to study the phenomena, what you're seeing out there, what you're experiencing, and using the literature to support maybe what interventions you're thinking you might want to use. Has it already been done, or is there a gap? And then I thought it was interesting because it also talks about the use of sites such as ReferenceWorks or EndNote to aid in your organization of your references. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. I use EndNote, and it allows me to pull information from CINAHL or EBSCO, pull those citations right in EndNote. I can classify them, I can put them in categories, and I can make notes on them, and I can even bring in a hard copy. And then that can be used on whatever computer I'm working on because it's virtual, it's like in a cloud. So that's really beneficial. I know many of you may think that you're done with school after this. You may think, well, I'm getting my master's, I'm done, or I'm getting my DNP, I'm done. I'm working on my PhD right now, and I have several DNP faculty that are now crossing over to get a PhD, and they're using their DNP project as kind of the precipitous for what they're doing for their PhD. So if you can save your information and organize it and keep it in a database, it can be very beneficial to you in the future if you do decide to go on or continue your education, or if you decide to in the future continue to elaborate on changes within whatever area you're working. So again, I thought that was just a great synopsis of even how you bring theory and theoretical frameworks into your scholarly project in order to help guide your research. So please make sure that you're spending time reading that. Then you'll see in the next week we went into the leadership, and so you should have done that survey that I sent out on Qualtrics, just kind of assessing your leadership style. And now we're going to start taking a look at, we see that there may need to be change. How do we implement that change, and how do leaders go about doing that? And so that will be kind of the next emphasis over the next week and a half will be on leadership. So thank you, class, for your excellent content contributions in your discussion posts. I really enjoyed last week. We got into some great discussions on patient satisfaction, whether we see it as a value or if it's a hindrance. And I thought the dialogue of you discussing your areas of expertise or where you're working and how patient satisfaction has affected you as a nurse or as a manager is very fascinating. And so I love that dialogue, and I really appreciate it. So again, hopefully you've had a review of some of the stuff before, and I know many of you are in your scholarly project now in different stages of it, that we are just kind of honing in on areas and giving you the resources and the content to help develop certain areas that you may have always had questions about. So thank you, and I look forward to our next week of class.